Couple more questions before you go. Back to some of the pagan beliefs. Is witchcraft real? Does it work?
I mean, I think that it works. I'm what you would consider a green witch, which basically means that I really, really like plants and rocks. And I use plants in all kinds of things. I actually,
You could have just been a geologist, right? You didn't have to study black magic, right? You could have just gone and gotten a white lab coat, stared at fucking rocks and shit. You didn't have to go full satanic black magic, Kay. It wasn't necessary.
this one kid made fun of my white coat whenever I was 11, and I was just like, fuck it. I'm just gonna be a witch now.
so so it works, right?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think there's a misconception around, what witchcraft actually is, and I have this debate with a lot of Christians a lot, whenever they kind of clutch pearls whenever they find out that I'm a practicing witch, me grinding up dried plants and speaking, manifesting incantations into the universe of something that, an end result that I desire to see is no different than, a Christian version of prayer. I speak to nature and the universe and you speak to a deity. But for me, in my perspective, manifestation works just as well as the average Christian would say prayer works.
And this is manifestation utilizing personal will and thought in order to manifest the result that you want. And these things end up becoming material based on the thought that you put out into what you would call maybe the id or the all or the aether or whatever different variation that you want to call it. These thoughts, the belief is that they're tangible and that when they go out into the aether, the universe has no choice but to deliver back to you that which you are asking it for. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say that the universe has no choice. I think of it as kind of like asking a question. You wouldn't say that whenever you pray that God has no choice but to answer you. You put it out there in hopes that your prayer will be answered. And witches and pagans do the exact same thing with manifestation. You put it out into the universe in hopes that it comes back to you, that it is answered. And you have evidence of it, whether it being answered in the same circumstantial way that you have proof that prayer works. If I speak a manifestation
Sure.
into, hey, my kid has COVID and I'm hoping for healing, a quick healing from my kid, and the next day my kid wakes up fever free, feeling great, bouncing off the walls. And of course, fever free, feeling great, bouncing off the walls. And of course, off the walls. And of course, another human being. But there are some witches that would argue otherwise, and it's one of those things where you're kind of divided on it. But in my personal opinion, I would say no. I think that is it's kind of does a disservice to the belief that there's this life force that connects all of us, and it's kind of a disrespect to that life force if you're utilizing it to actively harm another living creature.
So I know for sure magic works. I've seen it in practice, like in depth, seen it in practice. I know for sure it works. Um, I know. So I'll give you my opinion on it so that you know, and I hope that you think about it down the road. Um, anything that you project into will, if it sets motions and events in motion, has to utilize other people's will in order to manifest the thing that it is that you want. Therefore, by any subjective characteristic I can think of for harm, anytime you cast a spell, it would have to necessarily be harmful.
Because it's imposing your will on another person.
Yes, there's no way to not impose your will because you can't determine the result. So, well, I'm sorry, you can only determine the result, but you cannot determine the motions that lead to the result. and it will always use other human beings to do that. For instance, let's say you wanted to manifest money for yourself. How would that come to be without other people getting that money to you? It couldn't, right? So therefore, always the imposition of will into the ethos or the aether or the great id or the all-star or the all-spirit or the great god or the great buffalo or whatever the fuck you want to call it, right? It will always have to necessarily, if you follow the rules of logic, will have to impose on other people in order to manifest the thing that you want. So it necessarily would always have to be evil.
That's an interesting perspective, and I've actually never heard that before. It it is an interesting idea that, depending on what it is that you're asking for, how that manifests. Personally, I've never used magic to manifest physical things like money. So for me, like in my experience, wishing good health or speedy recovery, for my family, for loved ones, for people, on the internet that I've never met before, somebody that's riding in an ambulance as I'm stuck in traffic, just manifesting, good health and speedy recovery. I think if you're going to talk about magic from that perspective, um, because you're not wrong in the logic. I think that in that point, it's kind of an argument of whether the ends justify the means. If me manifesting, good health for somebody or a recovery from bad health or an injury, for someone, uh, if that justifies uh, what would be set in motion, in order for that to take place. Um, I don't think that anybody would logically argue that, for somebody to have better health if they're sick, you're objectively going to cause somebody else to get sick in order
I
for
would
them to get
argue it.
better.
I would argue it. I'll tell you why. Um, and again, I'll just follow the rules of logic with this, so that you can understand my position on why it's all evil, knowing that it works. Right? I'm coming from the realm of I know that this works. If you want to manifest good health in somebody, right? It's nice to think to yourself that you'd be manifesting it through the great ethos and that just suddenly they would wake up healthy. But this isn't usually how this works. You might uh, cast a spell, for instance, to make somebody healthy, and they come back from their doctor and they say they got the correct medication and they're feeling a lot better. And isn't this great? But what if your will that was imposed made the doctor treat that person over a different patient? And you have no idea if this is true or if this is not true. You have no clue. All you see is the result, right? You have no idea what extra steps went into the amount of toggles that probably had to be flipped in order to manifest the thing that you want. This is why necessarily all magic is evil. There's no way a subjectivist or an objectivist for morality could ever make a determination that imposing your will in order to chain the will of other human beings in order to make a manifest event happen is anything other than evil.
That is a very, very interesting perspective, and I will have to mill over that because I have actually never heard that before. You are
Yeah,
actually the first person to ever bring up that perspective to me. People talk about how witchcraft and magic and even just paganism as a whole is just inherently evil. But I think that a lot of people don't really take time to think through why they believe that.
they don't.
I
It's
always
a knee
believed that
jerk.
witchcraft was evil
All
because
right.
my
It's a
church
knee
told
jerk
me.
reaction, but you have to understand that there is nothing that you can make an imposition of will on that doesn't affect another human being. And if you make an imposition of will using your, so the mastery of witchcraft is when you can get to the point where you no longer have to cast a spell. The spell is all just bullshit, right? None of that matters. It's all just putting you in the mood, right? The mood for spellcraft. The true master at witchcraft can do it just by thought. They don't need the wands anymore. They don't need the cool Ouija boards. They don't need any of that shit anymore. They just can manifest via thought.
Oh
If you
yeah,
can
it's everybody don't play with Ouija boards. Don't do it.
Mhm.
Okay, just don't.
No, don't. But the thing is that if you're a person who can just manifest what you want via your thought, the imposition is always going to be that you're subverting the will of other human beings. This is why the only true prism for which you can pray would be through a merciful spirit period. Because often, what do they say? The best things in life are unanswered prayers. So a merciful spirit would not, in his benevolent nature, put wheels into place that would harm other people to manifest the thing that your will desires, whereas you have no prism for that, and everything you wish to manifest would necessarily impose on other people's will. That's
Well,
why witchcraft is evil.
well, there are, I will say, I'm not one of them, but overwhelmingly majority of witches do work with perceived deities. I'm an omnist. I believe that there's a realm of truth to all beliefs behind all deities.
Hmm.
I probably because of my religious trauma, I struggle with the idea of working with a higher power. But the overwhelming majority of witches do, whenever they do work, they are working with what they perceive to be a higher power.
I had the head of a satanic church once sitting not any further from me than you are right now, which is to say, he was far away and we were video chatting. And I walked him through the same exact logic for the great will and the great id. And he necessarily conceded that he had to impose his will upon others in order to get them to manifest the things that he wanted. There's no choice. It can't work any other way. It doesn't matter what you want. Even rain, if you really start to think about it, you recognize how many different components would go in to even your garden growing correctly that would always necessarily take another person's will. He just didn't care, right? He just didn't care. And so this is why I told him that I thought Satanism was necessarily evil as well. And he kind of agreed. And I just hope it's something that you mull over. Because if you can find a way logically out of that, which I don't believe you can, because I don't believe it's possible within the realm of manifestation, that I'm hoping that you'll abandon it. It's not necessary, by the way, to utilize witchcraft to manifest the things that you want. It's not necessary at all, and it's always going to be an imposition. So, just my 2 cents, right? Just my 2 cents. I studied the occult for years, studied black magic for years, studied witchcraft for years.
I bet those glasses make you see better.